Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I am Carlos Grosso, collaborator of the Aapresid network already for some time. And this meeting came after a co-creation workshop that worked together with REM a few months ago, where we had this idea of making progress with the management of fungicides for diseases in the main crops, mainly wheat, soy, and corn. After Doctors to the Rescue, this is something new. We have suspicions of who added this to the title, but hopefully we don't need to go to the rescue. But with the concepts that we have today available, we can plan very well ahead of time and avoid the rescue part. So thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to have 3 doctors sharing information and 3 doctors with a lot of experience in the field, and that's actually what we need. Tino De Rossi, Sebastián Reznikov, and Ignacio Erreguerena. So, the title is quite small after the co-creation of the doctors. The idea is that they have 15 minutes each, and I thought their proposal was very good to get together before and to come up with a joint presentation, so to avoid repeating certain topics. So always looking for the maximum level of efficiency. How we can have the maximum level of efficiency for management of diseases, for maximum yield of each crop, always respecting the environment and obtaining the maximum level of yield for the producers. We can see here the famous triangle of the disease. But if we don't have this triangle of the disease, then we don't have the disease, we don't have loss of yield, and we don't have a host susceptible, then we don't have a disease. So again, we see how we can apply the fungicide, but we have other practical tools that come before. So everything that I said about the comprehensive management, they need to be socially acceptable, responsible with the environment, and allow you to produce in a suitable way, profitable way. And the idea was to have 6 triggers so that we can talk about the comprehensive management of diseases and how we can obtain this maximum level of efficiency. We see that chemical control is in the 3rd level, but before that we have cultural control and genetic control. And something that is mentioned very much is the biological control. So when we see the assessment of each one, what I said before, right? The genetic control, the one that has the higher level of assessment. And when we see the chemical control, it's high in effectivity, and there are molecules that lost it.
Entonces, empezando, la idea es...
The idea is to speak about genetics and where we stand today with wheat, soy, and corn, and if there are differences among the crops. Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Carlos. We are now sitting at your table. And Juan Cruz, also thank you for your invitation. And it's a pleasure also to be here with Tino and with Seba. So thank you for your introduction. The idea is to delve into all the tools that we have available, even before applying a fungicide. In the case of wheat, and that is what I'm going to talk to you about. I want to highlight that we do have good news. We have a variety of materials when thinking about the behavior when faced with a disease. So we're doing very well in terms of options. But then we have implementation. And if we think, well, the behavior of a disease as a priority when we choose what to plant, sometimes it doesn't happen much. We think more about yield. But to have an idea, for Rosa Naranjada, we have 42% for rust. We have 42 for yellow rust and for yellow spot. Those are the most important ones. You know very well that there are many other diseases with wheat, but these are the ones that came up the most during the last years. So, Carlos, if you want to continue with the next slide, we can see these are data from last year. In the wheat area, it's dominated by susceptibility in terms of 50% to yellow rust and 34%, 35, 36% orange rust. So this at region level is something to consider, and it is important for the type of pathogen, which are rusts. And they want to have green texture that can be transmitted from one to the next. So that is something to consider. That is where we stand. Good afternoon. Thank you for your invitation. And I want to tell you about the behavior of the new varieties of soy when faced with the different diseases. This is an example compared with spot. This was a disease that was almost forgotten because all the varieties had resistance genes and they work very well. But then we had a change, a variety change with the introduction of EPRO technology, and that's when we started to see that this disease got more importance in the region. So many varieties were susceptible to this. So with this new variety change introduced by technology, this is the assessment of a macro parcel with commercial purposes, where we see that the major part of the varieties are susceptible to the frog-eye leaf spot. This is an alert. If you if you plant these varieties, you need to monitor, you need to identify it in order to have a control. Since if the disease has the material that is acceptable to it and favorable environmental conditions, it can be very aggressive. The good part is that the fungicide treatments that are available in the market respond very well, and they are quite efficient. Good afternoon. Thank you, the people from REN, Carlos, for the organization, and I hope you have a very happy day today sharing information. So let's now move to corn. These are some of the last studies of diseases that are affecting corn. But going back to what Carlos was saying, it is very important that we can ask when do we need to apply a fungicide, but based ourselves in which genetics and how genetics can be improved and modified year after year. So in this graph of this campaign, you have a fourth column, which is MB, which is white spot. A white spot disease, during these last years, we have seen it growing in different localities of Argentina, but in this campaign, it has been very significant and very dispersed. So we need a new tool to see what we are facing and what is the behavior of these hybrids and decide whether we need to intervene or not. Also in genetics, it's very important to see which are the changes. During this campaign, we were thinking in the case of corn, what was going to happen with stunting and spiroplasm. And we were thinking about materials that have a good behavior when faced with this situation. But when we were looking for these materials with good behavior, we forgot to see how they interact with the other things. So that's why we call biology such a complex process. We face different things. So we need to select materials for stunting, and then we had problems with white spot. And in the previous campaign, we were not thinking about stunting, and in the second disease at that moment was the blight. So now materials susceptible to blight are rare to find. So we have been working a lot to have materials with very good behaviors. But other things, we forget about other things as well. All the time we need to monitor which are the most prevalent diseases, the most important ones, and where we are aiming at. In all the crops, it's transversal, and you know it very well as technicians, as producers. The idea is to have stability and sanity, but sanity, many times, it becomes even more important because we need to see and analyze what is the information we have available. We need to work more on this, to have new and regionalized information, because it is not the same to plant soy, corn, wheat in the south of Córdoba, in the north, or in the center. Thank you. We are now going to move into the cultural aspect of the crop management. What happens with the evolution of diseases? Which are the decisions that we need to take in the field to be more efficient? So this is my part. We are going to speak about corn now. This is an example so that we can think about, when we were thinking about this question, genetics is the most important part. Okay, from management, what can we do? Many things that have add value and we can quantify them. This is something we have been doing for 10 years, testing all the management variables that we have assessed when faced with a disease, the type of damage, so early planting times and late planting times. So the variable that contributes the most is genetics. It is not the same to plant with materials that have good behavior, resistant, mildly resistant, and compared to non-resistant materials. So everything that you're going to explain for diseases in the future. In the case of corn, and corn in the center of the country, another variable is the seeding times, or when it is planted. Forget about the specific case of the percentage, but every time we plant in a later date, that crop needs to have more favorable conditions, so many diseases can develop well. So if we plant late, the crop probably will have more hours of water, days without sun. Crops in January and February have a critical period after March. So this creates conditions so that diseases can happen easier. So it is not the same to plant a material in October, December than January, February. And the more time it takes, the worse. So if you have good weather conditions, humidity, like a Año Niño, year child, you have better conditions and more development of diseases. So removing the genetic aspect and knowing which category of year this is, that helps you a lot to make decisions. We have crossed out two words, and we have in the center of the country, we have more corn on corn. So there are core areas, but corn on corn multiplies and increases a lot the necrotic diseases such as white spot. So we said this morning, we spoke about white spot. We had a very big epidemic this year will follow, and that can happen in the future and be a problem again. I want to give you now an example of the Asia rust. This disease is the one that the producer decided to apply fungicides because of the Asia rust. So what you can see in this chart is the first detections with the campaign 2003-2004 to this date. In general, first it appears in the north of Salta, and after 2 weeks, it is found in Tucumán. So it doesn't follow the same rule, but in the campaigns, in the different campaigns, the same happened. Now, what happened during the last years? In the last campaign, we couldn't detect it, or it's being detected very late. So we are now avoiding the disease. That's because in 2007, 2008 in Brazil, a sanitary emptiness is imposed of 60 to 90 days. Spores are viable in the air, and respecting that period, they couldn't plant soy afterwards. That had an impact in our area, and it arrives later. During the last campaigns, we couldn't even detect the disease. So this is what happened before in the north. We had long maturity periods, and when rust was detected, it coincided with R3, R4 detections or R5 initial detection, depending on the seeding times. That's when the producers apply the fungicides. Nowadays, in the north, the use of varieties of maturity level 5 and 6 have been adopted together with the sanitary emptiness in lots where we see the inoptimal times. So we have then an R5, R6, so we are now really avoiding the disease. The disease doesn't have an impact on the yield, but we must be careful in lots that were planted later on, where you need to intensify measures to control, and probably you will need some kind of application. Perhaps you can have an initial R5. And each crop has its own rules, set of rules, and together with Carlos, we wanted to find information about which were the main reasons for necrotic agents, as our colleagues were saying. In the case of wheat, with the yellow spot. And I wanted to show you what you see over here. This is a classic curve of this type of disease, like yellow spot disease. And what we want to do with the epidemiology of the disease, or how we detect it, trying to control the fallow of the last year, or the inoculum. The idea is to push this curve forward so that the beginning starts later. So to give you an idea of how technology changed, such as bringing new molecules to the seed, you will see now a chart or a graph of the incidence in blotter test, which is inoculum test of new generation seeds that were able to control pathogens that are very normal in seeds. And you can see that the control on that inoculum source is quite important.
And here you will see a condensation of a lot of information, but this graph shows three variables. One of them is the delay. This is in the field. How much is the epiphytosis delayed? And then other variables such as the rate related to the capacity of generate damage throughout a specific period for a disease. So this is against a control case, and in the case of a more basic product mostly used, the delay is around 10 days. But with the new seed treatments, we were able to delay it up to 20 or 25 days. And that is quite a lot. With technology trying to protect the seeds not only from the soil pathogens, but also from the inoculum that could appear later in the crop. And then with regards to crop rotation, I took Pablo Velázquez's work, working with Normita. I don't see her now. And basically, this shows how crop rotation is affected. And look at this. Wheat on soy is the one that has or presents more disease. This is the effect of crop rotation in these sort of diseases. So look how important it is for us to try and cut that inoculum source and the impact that we have on the disease. Thank you very much. And now continuing with the cultural strategies, a question that we might have is, are we doing the right diagnosis? Or what can we improve regarding monitoring, identification, and whether there are new tools for us to be more efficient? One more. Okay, so basically, and taking what we were discussing earlier, what is it that I need to consider? We need to keep on monitoring. That is the case, at least for some time. And I'm saying this with hope. I hope that we can have new revolutionary tools. But before moving into the lot, I need to know what is the risk related to the material that I chose and my weak points. So the health profile will tell me, okay, pay attention to this specific disease, and this disease will have its characteristics. So by knowing this, I'm going to monitor the lot or batch. And of course, basically, the goal here is productive, but basically, we have other sorts of monitoring like corn, wheat, but basically, we are focusing on a productive monitoring. So I need to know what decision-making model I'm going to be having or implementing. So according to this, I need to define what variable to consider. So for monitoring and fungicide application monitoring or application, we have Carmona's model, incidence on leaves. So what about the severity? It's good to know it, but it is a variable that for this decision-making model won't offer any information, but it will give us idea of the progress of the disease. And it is a subjective variable, but not with incidence. So for this monitoring, we need to have it being representative, especially in these polycyclic diseases, distributed throughout the batch, knowing that yellow rust will start in some focus. That's why representativeness becomes much more important here. And ideally, 50 tiller formations, it could be a little bit more or less. But when people tell me, oh, I have too much or too little, yeah, what do you mean by that? Having the field number is super important, knowing the tillers. And with the different diseases that we face, like yellow rust, makes us go earlier to the field compared to 10 years ago. And with these polycyclic diseases, we need to go to the field 1 or twice a week, especially when getting closer to the critical period. And regarding the diagnosis, in books we see different diseases, but in the field they look quite similar. The main problem, it's not that rust is too far, but in wheat, necrotrophic diseases are the most important ones. Some of them might be confused, and we also know that we have Drosclera trisli repentis, Simoseptoria tricidal, which is no longer so important, and also we have bacteriosis. I won't talk about that because it will make us stay here for 70 years. But basically, my piece of advice is you don't know what is the disease, it doesn't matter. Assess it, calculate the incidence, and then call an expert or a nearby lab for diagnosis, and then you will obtain the information. I will talk about the most important diseases in the northwest of Argentina and when to monitor them in the field. One of the diseases that we encounter almost every year in almost every plot of land is the brown spot. It is a necrotrophic disease transmitted through seeds, so it is very important that before planting you know the pathogenic load of your seeds so that we can start doing this before the seeding with the right seed control or seed treatment. So, as I said, this brown spot is throughout the entire cycle. We see this from the very beginning. We see this directly in cotyledons. It starts from the bottom to the top. So when trying to find it, go to the bottom. Another disease that became important lately is the frog eye leaf spot. It is also transmitted through seeds. There are many new varieties that are susceptible to it, so it's good for you to monitor them and identify them. Because to the lab, we receive some samples with similar spots, but when analyzing them, we do not see the pathogenic structure. Therefore, we believe that it might be phytotoxicity. So the right diagnosis is very important for decision making. Another disease that is very common in our region is what we call target spot. We see it in the stubble, and we see it usually starting at R3 and in the bottom part of the crop. And at the beginning, with the spots, it can be confused with the brown spot. And then another disease that we see is the leaf blight given to Cercospora, and this is necrotrophic as well, transmitted through seeds. And it is very easy to realize that a seed is sick because it is like purple, but those not presenting symptoms still can be having the pathogen, and you will know that by studying the pathology of the seeds. In the field, we need to see the typical symptoms in R5 or R6. That's usually how we see it in its maximum expression. And finally, the Asian rust of soy, a biotrophic pathogen, then if detected, it is in R5 or R6. Okay, so in the case of corn, I am only discussing 2 diseases for us to think about this. Because here my colleagues were talking about the seeds, the monitoring, the full monitoring, the system. And when talking about fungicide application, it could be for rust control or for other sorts of leaf spots, such as blight or Cercospora. But it's important for us to see how we can reduce these from seed treatment, early monitoring to see whether this is the right time for planting, etc. So the lines are not well represented here on the slide, but we see that the common rust is a weak biotrophic that is usually in colder temperatures and in new crops. Therefore, the curve growth, not the way in which you see on screen, I'm sorry, I did it the wrong way, but it grows much more in early stages. And with the blue curve, we show how necrotrophic diseases are growing together with the crop. They grow in height, they take different parts of the plant, and they start from the floration stage. So thinking of the 2 groups of diseases, the weaker rust and the spots, we need to see when this corn can be affected by a disease. Because we need to know when to monitor, because we see this in wheat. These are crops that you can easily walk around, take samples, seeing different parts of the plot of land. And the same happens with other crops, from V7 or V6 to V10, it's a little bit easier. But then when it's over 2 meters high, trying to get samples and trying to understand what is happening there, it is much more complicated because physically it is different. So there we need to be cautious when doing the diagnosis and monitoring, because we are going to encounter that when we receive a question about what is happening with the crop, usually we are seeing like the end of the curve with any of the diseases. Therefore, in the case of corn, we need to reinforce not what you see, but how often, to accompany it. And in crop, we have an advantage. We have studied where diseases have a higher impact. And we know that these leaves over here are those explaining the generation of yield. And if there is any sort of damage here, the impact on the yield will be very important. Therefore, we always see the entire plant, but we need to focus. If you click here, there, we'll see what is happening there when the leaves are growing. We need a precaution there. And when we know when the spike or ear will be inserted, then we need to pay attention to this, especially when we don't know about the health profile or if we've been changing the genetics and we don't know the behavior. So we're talking about monitoring, diagnosis, but linked to the genetics and what we know about it. Thank you. Let's continue now with one of the triggers of this presentation. If we had to apply, how can we decide? We don't have much time, right? Okay, so I'm going to try and go faster. So I did the following. Regarding monitoring, I said that we already have the numbers, we already monitor. So what do? We use Carmona's model. So what do we do now? Basically, with these thresholds, we try and maintain the disease below its exponential growth area when I can no longer control it. So this is the epidemiological perspective here. This is a very large condensation of the calculation of this threshold. We can calculate different potentials based on different conditions, different control efficiencies, damage coefficients. I try to condensate all this, and basically these are the ones updated up to last year based on my own data. So I have the number. So what do now? Well, now I need to see what other things I have to consider. And of course, the health profile. Can I wait or not? Is it helping me with the management of the disease, with this sanitary profile? So then I see the threshold, the higher threshold, and there the sanitary profile is helping me make the decision. Okay, I can wait a bit longer. In the case of epidemiological characteristics, they are polycyclic, but they do present differences in this term that I mentioned, this apparent infection rate, which is the speed of the damage, basically. Do not kill me, I'm oversimplifying here. And yeah, basically that's it. So rusts are much more explosive. And if we compare this against necrotrophic, this is what we see. We need to know what is the active ingredient that I will be using. And if it is losing sensitivity in the population, let's try and be productive. Let's go to the smaller values so that we can be sure about the epidemiological stage that is below the exponential phase. The climate and environmental conditions that are coming next is if I am close to the threshold and we know that there are going to be rains, okay, let's go to the lower threshold and apply the fungicide. And one more, this happens in plots of lands in the south of the province of Buenos Aires, wheat on wheat. We have in the case of Treslera, the disease happening very early. And sometimes the idea is that when we have a small crop, we need to think about how we're going to nurture it, wait for the plant to keep on tilling, and then we can use the monitoring for the fungicide. Because sometimes people tell me I have a very early disease, so what do? Wait a little bit, thinking that the disease might get diluted if I help it with nitrogen, and then we can wait and push then the curve of the progress of the disease forward. Okay, we don't have much time. Sorry, they were not using a microphone. Well, Nacho probably has a lot of information. It's not the same as in wheat, okay? Yeah, I can approach you after the meeting, yeah. Do not forget the southeast. No, of course not. I'm from there. Okay, so now in this slide, we see that basically we need to see how different fungicides work and see when they have the maximum control efficacy. Like in the case of preventive applications before the pathogen infection, we will have here extravirulins, carboxamides, and multi-site. There we are going to be having a good result if the pathogen is not resistant to this active. So once the pathogen enters the leaf, then the application is curative, and it could be after the infection and pre or before the symptoms. And here the benzimidazoles and triazoles work quite well, but the truth is that in the field we are doing eradicating applications, because when we already see the structures or signs of the pathogen or the symptoms, that's when we start. So when making that decision, the efficacy of fungicides gets lost because we are getting late to the application. So this is a concept that I wanted you to remember.
Now, Following with the soy example, I want to introduce you to an application system of fungicides that was designed by Marcelo Carmona. The good thing, and I want you to look well, all the factors that he considers for the decision-making process of the fungicide. Precipitations, in this case, from R3, how much of that precipitation was from 7 millimeters or higher, because that amount of millimeters is what gives the strength to the raindrop so the pathogen can disperse upwards. In the case of the necrotrophic, the history background, the background information of the lot. So with all that, you gather points. The tilling system is also very important. If it's direct tilling, we will have the furlough, and in the furlough, the inoculum source, the quality of the seed, if it was treated or not, if the lot is destined for production of seeds or not, the potential of the lot, and if the previous campaign there was presence of symptoms or not. So based on all that, you gather all the points, this decision-making tool, and depending on the value you get, it says proceed with the application of a fungicide, think about it, analyze the situation, wait more, or finally do not apply because it is very difficult to have an economic return. So we tried this system in the northeast, one in San Agustin and La Cruz, and when we were answering the different questions, we got in a locality not to apply the fungicide, and in the other one, we had to apply it. The results you can see for the locality of San Agustin that said do not apply the fungicide, we can see that the decision-making tool is number 4, did not differentiate from the witness. So there was no response. Then, when we assess it in the locality where it said yes, apply it, we can see a response, and we can see that the treatment 4, which is decision-making tool, differentiates in terms of statistics of witness without fungicide application. So this is very good. So you can see all the factors that are considered when deciding whether to apply or not a fungicide in the soy crop. 40 minutes and we still did not answer your question. But the idea is that we can think together and we don't go directly to the answer, but we can create criteria. And what our colleagues were saying before, how we make those decisions. Nacho spoke about different thresholds for each of the wheat diseases with a different number, corrected with the potential of yield. Sebas told you about many variables that you need to consider to know whether it is important to apply a fungicide or not, and when, in which cases. Now we will see an example, but we know well how the threshold is created and why and what for it is created. You can see with the blight, we have a gradient scale of a disease, more severe to less severe, and the idea with these tests is that we can obtain the disease, the plants that are sicker with less yield, and the ones that are healthy with more yield. So with the gradient of a disease, we can see, we can place numbers, how many kilos we are going to lose for each point of severity that the disease has. Correlations, etc., and we are able to measure. So that is the way to generate or create these thresholds. Now, the question is, I gave you a lot of numbers of diseases that can become thresholds. Other diseases, not. End-of-cycle diseases. For soy, for instance, that affect the leaf, different parts of the plant. So it is difficult to speak about only one threshold of a disease, and it is very difficult to generate. We don't have enough data. If it's in wheat, in corn, that we can isolate the disease, they will be inoculated. If they are susceptible to this disease, the same with rust, and you get a value that enables you to make decisions. Now, if nature just told you the threshold depends on the potential, and it is not the same, the 5,000 kilos of wheat, that in Cordoba we cannot get to that number, so we need to start moving and see, okay, the potential is different. The threshold changed dramatically. But now, if you think about the formulation of the threshold, it has many variables, and one of those is the price of the crop. And the price at what each producer sold, or is going to do it in the future, is going to change the threshold as well. Seba was mentioning the efficiency of the fungicide. You have a fungicide, you bought it before the campaign, and you don't have the capacity to change it for X reason, and you're going to apply one that had prevention elements, but you are getting there late. So everything changed. That's why it is important when we tell you this and we show you these examples that we work with this creation of thresholds and we explain how much we lose for each severity point. So this is measured when, with which genetics, which is the probability that a loss happens or not, and with that you can create your own criteria and apply it in your own lot. To say, okay, I am within this range, moving in this potential, this is the money I can invest for sanity of my crop. So based on all that, you can get to your own threshold with specific data, and you need to take it to the reality of your lot to obtain value. And here, as an example, we have thresholds for corn with different disease, for different situations. There are some examples of averages that you can find. But again, so that you can see, well, for rust, for blight, for white spot, it's not there. Thank you very much. We have only 8 minutes left. So now we're going to speak about resistance. What can you tell us? Because we know that this is a very important topic. So in this graph, you can see what we are doing, what we are busy with. Because in the Northeast, the producers were using the same products. And this product, what we saw was that it had a loss of efficiency with many of the diseases for soy. So what happened if we continue to apply the same and we don't make a decision? What we are doing actually, if you look at the graphs, if I have a population of pathogens where white are susceptible and red is resistant, I apply a product and the resistant, I don't kill it, it's going to multiply, and that population is going to change. If I apply always the same product, well, what I'm actually doing is selecting those samples of the pathogen that have lost sensibility to the product that I am applying. So I am actually doubling the problem, and that is something that we have seen so far. This is an example from the north. For foliage fungicides test, we can see the witness, a double mix, triazole and spirulina, that is used in the north. What we could see was these are applications in R3 compared against a mixture of fungicides. So what we see is that the witness and the double mixture did not differentiate. The crop ended up dirty, and that caught our attention to continue studying these diseases and see what happened, because when we use another mixture of fungicide, like the one that you can see in the picture, control was quite good. So where do we stand and what do we know about resistance by the pathogens to the different active principles? In the case of ring spot, target spot, What we saw in Brazil is that there are reports for resistance to spirulina and triazoles, and we have seen in the case of triazoles tolerance. We had our own test, isolation from the north, and we have seen that loss of efficacy in the case of strobilurin, benzimidazole, and it depends on the isolation, isolations that are sensitive and others that have lost sensitivity. Even though we have done this in the lab, we don't have a confirmation of these mutations, so we cannot tell you that there is a resistance in Argentina to this pathogen. However, everything indicates that it can be present. In the case of the brown spot, this is distributed all throughout the country. The group of Marcelo Carmona published that they found resistance to strobilurins. So this has been reported in the United States as well. For Sarcopora circuci, this is a disease that is present, and for me it's one of the most difficult diseases to handle. There is a study that is very good from Francisco Sartua, Marcelo Carmona's group, where he studied sensitivity of pathogens of different parts of the country, and he could observe that 100% of the isolations he studied were resistant to strobilurins, and they didn't have an effect on this pathogen. And in the case of the benzimidazole, half of the population was resistant and the other 50% was acceptable. And in the case of triazoles, he could observe that they work well, quite well, but there was a certain level of tolerance to ciproconazole. So nowadays, the mix that has ciproconazole is the one that is used the most, according to the surveys, in the northeast and in the north. And for the frog eye leaf spot, we have not seen it in the isolations and the tests, the lab tests. All the actives work well, and the tests in the field with applications in due time and form of strobilurin and triazoles, we had a very good level of efficiency. We have 4 minutes left. Corn, the application rate is very low for biological reasons, and the active ingredients that are used, we don't have many problems with any disease in terms of resistance. So any comments concerning wheat? You know very well that we have a pathogen reported at worldwide level, even in Argentina. It's in its adjustment time. It is tolerant to strobilurin and some triazoles, and in that case, the adjustment has to be done with active ingredients, and with the rest, we're doing quite well. Please pay attention to the chart on the right. How many green arrows can you see in relation to the red ones? So we are now in a good position. The red has to do with reiterada, and in general lines, we have a good opportunity to delay this type of problems with wheat. So that is my idea, and that's my message. Nacho, with biologicals, do you want to conclude this session? I want to tell you a bit about what happens with biologicals. This is a working line, or this is a market that is very important. There are many biological products. The idea, or our idea, and we have discussed it a lot, and from Syngenta, from science, from the environment and what nature can give us, from science and sustainability, to have a firm march and to really delve into these world of biologicals, to understand them, to position them well, to develop them, and implement them. So we need to really shed a lot of light as an activity in itself. So that is my message, to really understand it and to look for the best possible position, because we have very good products in some cases and we need to understand them very well to have a good result. So thank you very much. Thank you, Eugenia, Juan Cruz from La REM Group, and for you and for being here. We are running out of time. If you have questions, you can send them by WhatsApp. Nacho is a specialist in barley, and probably he will be able to answer your questions. I'm sorry we could not include everything, but we are running out of time. Thank you very much.